A man discovered something strange at work. He noticed that nobody who came to withdraw money from the bank ever paid attention to the fees being deducted. It was just a 1-cent service fee, but in this tiny charge, he saw a golden opportunity, because if he succeeded, he'd become rich overnight. Although he was just a low-level employee, the bank he worked for had 9.5 million customers all over the world, and almost every day the bank collected service fees based on the type of account. If he could just take 1 cent from every single account and keep it for himself, he'd become a millionaire in no time. And the best part? No customer would ever suspect a thing. The problem was, his position was too low. He didn't have the clearance. But luckily, Nick was a computer whiz. He stayed up all night writing a Trojan horse program. He hid it inside a harmless-looking file, then sent an email to the bank manager and waited for his prey to take the bait. Sure enough, the next day, the manager came in and routinely opened his computer. When he saw the email, disguised as a business inquiry, he clicked on it without a second thought. And just like that, Nick successfully hacked his computer. He even stumbled upon the manager's secret affair with his assistant. But Nick didn't care about that. He started controlling the Trojan remotely, and it instantly spread through the office, quickly infecting the entire bank system. His real goal was to find the administrator's computer, because only it had the permissions to access the bank's main server. Soon, the staff realized their computers were hacked, which was all part of Nick's plan. When the network security officer arrived, his first step was to reboot the entire system. But that operation required a password. And just like that, Nick easily got the login credentials and connected to the bank's server. Now, all he had to do was deduct 1 cent from all 9.5 million customer accounts, disguised as a service fee. In just 1 minute, he made $95,000. But the money wasn't his yet. To avoid leaving a trail, he needed to find a dormant company account. Then, he could transfer all the money into it. After a few clicks, Nick successfully pulled it off without anyone being the wiser. He just made his first score. But he barely had 2 seconds to celebrate before there was a frantic knock at the door. He never expected his creditors to find him. Turns out, Nick's father had a $30,000 gambling debt, and now he was in the hospital with a heart condition. Luckily, they caught it in time to save him. But now he needed $60,000 for bypass surgery, an amount that seemed impossible. Nick asked his manager for a year's salary in advance, but since he was just a contract worker, the bank said there was nothing they could do. Desperate to pay for his father's operation, he had no choice but to go to a loan shark. His father's surgery was a success, but now Nick was in massive debt. And even though Nick had the money now, getting it out was another question. He knew if those guys caught him, they'd beat him senseless. Seeing them break down his door, Nick panicked, grabbed his laptop, and made a run for it. But when he got to his scooter, he realized something terrible. He'd left his keys in the room. With the thugs closing in, Nick frantically jumped into a cab. The driver saw the men chasing him. He immediately jacked up the price, forcing Nick to hand over every last penny he had. Once the driver got the cash, he slammed on the gas. He managed to lose them, but before long, the thugs were right behind them again. Nick knew if he didn't pay them back today, he was a dead man. But transferring the money online would risk exposing him, and an ATM had a withdrawal limit. He could only take out $20,000. To get all $95,000 in cash at once, there was only one way: go to a bank teller. But to prevent fraud, the staff would ask for a reason for such a large withdrawal. To avoid that hassle, he had to forge an email. Nick wrote to the bank manager in the name of the dormant accounts company, claiming an urgent need for the funds and posing as one of their employees. Sure enough, the bank manager called him. After confirming the amount with Nick, he started getting the cash ready. Meanwhile, the thugs were closing in. They tried to run him off the road, but the cab driver, having been paid, was surprisingly skilled. He floored it and broke right through. Nick arrived at the bank shaken but safe. He walked to the counter, trying his best to look calm. The manager already had the cash waiting. But then he was asked for identification. Nick didn't have any real documents, but he had forged a photo ID beforehand. The manager stared at it with a blank expression for what felt like an eternity. Just when Nick thought he was caught, the manager nodded. It was a false alarm. He'd actually managed to fool him. Nick finally had the money, but he'd only taken 2 steps when the manager called out to him again, and Nick's heart sank. Had he been found out? He turned around nervously, but the manager just wanted him to count the money on the spot. After all, it's standard practice. Nick instantly relaxed. He said he trusted the bank, then nervously made his way out. Thugs were waiting. Nick quickly gave the driver a cut for his troubles, then handed the rest of the money over. Seeing the 2 thugs leave satisfied, Nick was finally free. But looking at his father lying motionless in the hospital bed, Nick was filled with guilt. He told himself it was all for a good reason and vowed never to do anything illegal again. But the next day, back at work, he heard on the news that the bank manager had been murdered. Nick was stunned. Before he could even process it, the bank's security team put the entire building on lockdown. They said the police were on their way and no one could leave until the investigation was over. Nick knew he had nothing to do with the murder, but if the police investigated, they would search his computer. They would find the email he sent. Then they'd find the Trojan on the server, and his theft would be exposed. But his laptop was at home, so he couldn't access it remotely. Panicking, Nick looked at a floor plan. To delete the Trojan, he had to get to the server room on the 4th floor, but the only elevator required a fingerprint scan, and entering the server room itself required high-level admin credentials. He was just a low-level teller. There was no way he could get access. Nick was so nervous he hid in the bathroom, thinking he was done for. But then, an administrator rushed in. Seeing the man's phone in his bag, Nick suddenly had a crazy idea. He nervously grabbed the phone. Without a second thought, he peeled off the screen protector. The clear fingerprint left behind on it was his key. To avoid suspicion, Nick disguised himself as a janitor and casually walked into the elevator. He took out the screen protector and successfully activated the panel. The elevator started, but before he could enter the server room, he had one more crucial step. Nick took the screen protector and snuck into the admin office. First, he had to delete today's security footage so no one would see him take the elevator. Then, to avoid being caught on camera entering the server room, he needed to update the security system's firmware. The servers would be down for a 15-minute reboot. That gave him a window to deal with the Trojan. Finally, he forged an access ID for himself, picking an authorized employee's name at random. He printed out the ID badge, and with this keycard, Nick took the elevator again and finally got into the server room. But now he only had 9 minutes left. He had to find the server and delete the Trojan fast. Meanwhile, the security system upgrade had aroused suspicion. Even though it was a routine procedure, maintenance was usually done after hours. The head of security suspected someone was up to something, and as they were looking into it, they suddenly got an alert on their phones. It showed the ID Nick had forged had just accessed the server room, but the real employee was right there with them. At the same time, Nick finally found the server, but deleting the Trojan was taking time. The security chief was already on his way. Nick nervously watched the progress bar. The chief sensed something was off, and just as he drew his weapon, he found the room completely empty. By then, Nick had already changed back into his clothes and made it back to his desk just moments before security came by. With their search turning up nothing, the innocent employee became the prime suspect. Soon, the police arrived on the scene. When Nick saw them take away the manager's computer, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. But just when he thought his life could go back to normal, there was another problem at the hospital. His father's surgery had been a success, but the doctor gave him more bad news. The post-op recovery would cost a fortune. This sent Nick spiraling. The $95,000 was already gone, but looking at his father, he knew he couldn't just give up. Staring at his 2-digit bank balance, Nick didn't know what to do. He regretted not taking more money when he had the chance. Now that the Trojan was deleted and the police were investigating the manager's murder, hacking the server again would be incredibly risky. He'd almost certainly get caught, but just as Nick was losing hope, he had a stunning realization. Looking at the logos of all the different banks on an ATM, he finally figured out a new plan. His country didn't just have one bank. Each major bank had about 10 million customers. If he took just 1 cent from each account, that would be $100,000. And with 8 major banks, that meant he could make $800,000. So, Nick started forging emails again, successfully getting the passwords for each bank. To give himself enough time, he even asked his supervisor for a sick day. In just half a day of frantic work, Nick successfully stole $800,000. He didn't just pay for his father's treatment. He started living the high life. Nick bought a luxury villa downtown and began to enjoy his new, extravagant lifestyle. But to avoid being discovered, he still went to work every day, pretending to be a low-level bank clerk. Just when he thought he could get away with it forever, an elderly woman noticed something was wrong. After she questioned the strange service fee, Nick's scheme was finally uncovered by the bank. However, this unbelievable story isn't from a movie. It's based on a real event that happened at a major bank.